A historian's life is full of threats because everything today is considered sacrosanct.
I wasn't convinced that this guy is that big in Indian history who deserves his own serial.
Suddenly the audience erupted, and section of them erupted in protest. There were paper rockets thrown at the stage. I am the true Muslim ruler, so I should be given the khitab of Badshah. So they put something together and made an effigy, apparently
Your effigy?
my effigy, and burnt it in MG Road. So almost for a month or two, that was my DP.
It seems like there is really no recorded use of iron casings for rockets before that anywhere in the world.
And in those drunken revelry, he would say that I can face the British sword, but not my wife's tongue. So Tipu had a lot of daddy wounds. People in Kodagu, in Coorg, convert not only the living prisoners but also the dead. You can't wish away your past just because you like or don't like somebody. This is a reality of the past.
Vikram, welcome to SparX. I had so much fun reading both of your books, and I don't think I've ever read such a big history book. Perhaps maybe Discovery of India.
Wow.
That was in high school days. But I think as I was going through your book, and we'll obviously talk about both of the books in 2 episodes, but also realizing the quality of Indian history is rising dramatically. Last 10 to 15 years, you have been at the forefront of it. Many other authors have come up. And looks like, what I also seen in this podcast, there is a lot of interest in Indian history. At some point you chose to make a career out of this, left your corporate career and moved into history.
Yeah.
Was there some insight, or is it just need driven, or just, passion driven? You just realized that, I just need to go back and learn about Indian history and tell these stories.
Thank you, Mukesh. I think this was in the making for a very long time, and I'm glad the stars have aligned. I've seen several of your podcast episodes with great interest. On your question, I don't think I ever planned, that this is the career I'm going to choose. It happened, that lovely English word, serendipity. That's how a happy accident. As a child in school, I hated history. It was the
all
subject.
of us did. It is taught, there's nowhere to...
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I know most of the punishments that I got in school was for history. Always found kneeling down outside class because who succeeded whom and which battle was fought in which year. These seemed like extraneous details which
that itself is a different history. I think from the era both of us are from, kneeling outside the class and all of those.
That can't be done now.
Yeah, exactly. So that's also a different history of how education was in India.
True. So for someone like that, I was 12 or 13 years of age, and that's when you'd remember The Sword of Tipu Sultan on Doordarshan. Which Sanjay Khan played.
Actually, I will tell you, I actually, all these guys here, they're all 20s and so on. I made them watch that The Sword of Tipu Sultan on YouTube. And they were, they're watching as if it's a comedy show or something.
For the production qualities. But we used to watch it with a lot of awe, saying, wow, it's such a wonderful serial. So in that, if you remember the Mysore royal family of the Wadiyars, from whom Hyder Ali usurps the throne of Mysore, and his son is Tipu Sultan. So to show Hyder and Tipu in a good light, the Wadiyar rulers were shown in a very, very derogatory fashion. The Maharaja was shown like this, fat, buffoon who was dancing along with the court dancer. And the Maharani, one of those typical, Ekta Kapoor serial vamps who's always conspiring and conniving against Tipu. And several others. I mean, a lot of his atrocities in various parts of southern India, all that was whitewashed. And about all of this, there were several protests, not only in Karnataka, but in other parts too.
During that
Kerala,
time?
Yes. Now any historical, there are protests, whether it's Padmavati, it's Baji Rao, Mastani. But those days, it was, as far as I remember, it was not a political movement. It was a lot of people's angst.
Yeah.
And if you remember the premier studio in Mysore, where the shooting was happening, that also caught fire.
Yeah.
And Sanjay Khan's face was burnt. And the Kannada media here had all these fancy stories that this is the curse of the Wadiyar.
Yes.
And so as a young child who otherwise, was found kneeling down outside class, I don't know what this did to me. I think that's why the larger power of surrender to a larger, power, identity and destiny and so on, that played in, and I decided on a whim that I want to know the truth behind this one king and queen who was shown badly in that serial. And my family had really nothing to do with Mysore. I'm half a Tamilian, half a Maharashtrian, just settled in Bangalore since long. So every vacation thereafter meant going to Mysore, meeting members of the royal family, some old historians, archivists, palace, people.
It's easy to go and just meet.
It was very tough. I mean, this little boy in half pants coming there and not even being able to talk the language Kannada then so well, which I learned later slowly. It was quite something. And I was just sitting there and putting all this together in the form of a book for myself, a scrapbook where I could also sketch a bit. So I would sit in the palace, make sketches of the kings and queens. And this madness of sorts, junoon jo kehte hain Mysore ke liye, that continued almost for 10 long years. Even
It started in your teenage years.
Ji, bilkul. And then it went on till 24, 25. And slowly the interest expanded to the whole dynasty. And they were one of India's longest reigning royal houses, ruling for 600 years, from 1399 till the time of India's independence. And after this long journey, I realized that there was not even a single book written in the modern times which covered this entire period, giving us an idea of the political, the social, the economic and cultural history of Mysore, which in a way was the building block or the foundation for modern Karnataka. The Karnataka today that we pride as, the IT center, the tech center, the foundations for education, for women's education, reform, social reforms. All of this was laid by the later Wadiyars and some of their illustrious divans like Sir M. Vishweshwaraya and Diwan Mirza Ismail. But it was so sad, and that's another bane of Indian historiography, which is so very Delhi-centric. All of us only study about a few dynasties in and around Delhi, but large parts of South India where we are sitting, or Northeast India, all of this don't even feature in the rubric of Bharatiya Itihas. So it was with that in mind that after so much was collected and many well-wishers said, you're good with language, so why don't you put this together in the form of a book? And that's how quite serendipitously in 2008, my first book, which was called Splendors of Royal Mysore, the untold story of the Wadiyars, it came out.
Right.
I thought it's a one-book wonder and I'll go back to my boring corporate
And you
job.
you wrote this while you were still in your corporate job?
Yes, in Citibank and Hewlett Packard and all these places, GE Money. And it was soul sapping, to be honest, that, I was thinking, am I going to die one day calculating the profit and loss of some American company?
तो आप क्या करते दिन में ऑफिस जा रहे हैं शाम को आके लिखते थे
बिल्कुल, Jekyll and Hyde. So it was quite a challenge. But later I realized that, I thought it was a one book wonder. I'll go back to this. But thankfully, destiny had other plans there too. So one led to the other. My next book was on this fascinating woman called Gauhar Jan. She was India's first woman and the first artist to record her voice on the gramophone in 1902 when recording technology came to India. And thanks to the contributions of not only her but several other women of that era, today if the music industry is what it is thanks to the contributions of these women, whose stories again in typical patriarchal fashion, we have just pushed it under the carpet.
And her voice is still on, now we can find it on YouTube?
I have tried to do that because I've, as part of that research, I set up an archive called the Archive of Indian Music. It's probably India's first digital sound archive for vintage gramophone records of that era. So on SoundCloud, if you actually type Archive of Indian Music, I put up about 2,000 tracks free of cost for people to access. And this is relates to Hindustani, Carnatic music, folk music, theatre recordings, early cinema recordings of Saigal and Devika Rani. And
This is from almost more than 100 years
More than
ago.
100. 1902 was when recording first began in India. And also speeches of leaders like Gandhi and Tagore, Subhash Chandra Bose. And we in India did not have a national sound archive. Like we don't have many things about preservation and protection
I'm
of
very
our
curious,
culture.
and we'll talk about this in the, when we talk about your other book on Savarkar. But in this, speeches like, let's say, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and all that, are there some recordings available? For
Some are probably with the Prasar Bharati and so on. But these were on those 78 RPM shellac discs. And it's so sad, Mukesh, that these are found in chor bazaars and raddi shops. And that is where we source them. Almost 15,000 gramophone records. Literally me going as the glorified raddi collector, collecting all of this from there. And we were very ably supported by Mr. Mohandas Pai at that time. And that's how Archive of Indian Music started. And that was an offshoot of my research on Gauhar Jan. Because along with being a historian, I'm also a trained classical musician. So while writing the biography of a musician, I really wanted to hear her voice. But आजकल वो needle भी नहीं मिलता, the 78 RPM, the needle, the machine नहीं मिलते हैं. तो और ज्यादातर लोग अपना ग्रामोफोन रिकॉर्ड दे देते हैं कबाड़ी दादी का नानी.
बट अभी होता है कबाड़ी बाजार, कहाँ होता है?
बहुत सारे होते हैं. हाँ, या इन चांदनी चौक में.
अच्छा, ओके.
या फिर यहाँ एवेन्यू रोड इन बैंगलोर हैज लॉट. देयर इज अ सीता फोन एंड कंपनी व्हिच राइट फ्रॉम द 1930s. जो LPs होते थे, EPs, वो सब अभी वहाँ पे कबाड़ी के शॉप में मिलता है.
Oh, that's a whole new episode in itself. I think it sounds fascinating, and yeah. So got it. So just maybe let's just zoom into that. One fine day, then you decided, okay, your book has gotten pretty decent reception, but it must have been a big deal to say, I'm going to just quit the corporate life and just try to make a living as a historian. I mean, can't possibly be easy choice.
Yeah, true. So there too, I think Gauhar Jan changed my life. So the first 3 books came out. One was on Mysore, one was on Gauhar Jan, another on a Veena Vidwan called Dr. S. Balachandran. उसके बाद by chance, मैं बहुत सारी जगहों पे lectures दे रहा था, talks and so on. तो by chance again serendipity struck where I'd gone to the University of Queensland for a talk. और वहाँ पे for my good luck, there was the head of the school of history and the head of the school of music who was there in the audience. और लेक्चर के बाद उन्होंने मुझसे कहा कि आपने इतना काम किया है इसके ऊपर, तो क्यों ना इसको एक PhD के रूप में आप you put it together. I said, I'll be happy. Don't give me an honorary degree. मुझे वो नहीं चाहिए. I want to work for it. The rigors of actual academic writing.
Right.
So, and my good luck there was an Indian professor called Professor Singhal who had died with a bequest saying this is for Indian scholar to come and study in the university. And that bequest was expiring in the next 6 months. Or lo and presto, you had a aspiring Indian scholar there. Right. So I was so lucky that I didn't even have to spend money for my PhD over the next 4 years. And that really changed my life. उसके बाद वो कॉन्फिडेंस भी आया कि मुझे अपने डे जॉब पे आई डोंट हैव टू बी समझ गया डिपेंडेंट.
आपके PhD का थीसिस टाइटल क्या था?
इट वाज ऑन द advent of recording technology in India and its impact on the social cultural history of the times.
So 4 years you immerse yourself in that, and after coming back you decided now I'm going to be full-time historian.
Yes.
Outstanding. Right. So let's come back to this book, right? I want to just really grab this book and show to the audience also. This is like really big, nearly 1,000-page book, and see the fascinating thing about this book, Vikram is going through it, is you learn so much about this entire book is about 40 or 50 year period, 1750 to 1800, and while the book is on Tipu Sultan, you learn so much about the social fabric of the time, cultural milieu, how British were making inroads, and also there's so much warfare among various factions in the southern peninsula itself. So it's also a history of the period. But as I was finishing this book, and why I understand your fascination from that Sanjay Khan serial, why Tipu Sultan? I wasn't convinced that this guy is that big in Indian history who deserves his own serial and his own this big book. Well, I'm glad to read what is the thought process that this guy deserves such serious scholarly treatment.
No, I think this idea was in my mind even after that first book of mine. I wanted to zoom in on those 40 years. As you rightly said, I think those 40 years were the unmaking of India. उसके बाद भारत का पतन, it just started, it was so steady and we became a slave nation immediately after the 4th Anglo-Mysore War. You had the Maratha Wars after that. This needed a more holistic treatment. तो तब से मेरे मन में था कि इसके बारे में एक पूरा किताब लिखना है. But as I've mentioned even in the introductory pages, lots of things happened which made me postpone the journey to write about this man. So a few weeks, I think I was 26 or 27 when my first book came. यहीं Bangalore में there was a talk I was giving on this very interregnum period, the intermission, so to say, when a usurpation happens. And I was actually reading out letters of Tipu Sultan himself, which I have quoted even in this book, where he's saying, he's ordering his commanders to go to फला जगह पे जाओ, इतने मंदिर तोड़ो, गिरजाघर तोड़ो. He's actually...
और ये सब like verified letters हैं?
Yeah, these are
available archives में.
Yes. And these are, they're all in Persian, the translations available. And he's talking almost with pride that, I have converted 4 lakh kafirs in Calicut and all of that. तो मैं उसके खुद के जो चिट्ठियाँ थी वो पढ़ रहा था. So then suddenly the audience erupted, a section of them erupted in protest. There were paper rockets thrown at the stage, and the organizers quickly, shut down the talk, and they ushered me inside to safety. But there was my father, poor father, who was sitting in the front row. Some Tipu fan club or some person who went and thama diya unke haath mein ek pamphlet saying, you have only one son, so if you want him to live long, please ask him to mind what he writes and speaks.
टीपू फैन क्लब क्या होता है उसमें?
बहुत सारे हैं. अभी आप बाहर जाइए तो यहाँ हर जगह पे उसके मिलेंगे. आई थिंक द वेपनाइजेशन एंड द मैनर इन विच कंटेम्प्रेरी पॉलिटिक्स हैज almost incorporated these characters of the past. It's quite a phenomenon. और उसके my bad luck कि उसके बिल्कुल 2-3 हफ्ते बाद in Deccan Herald I was writing a piece on the Diwans of Mysore, and it started with Purnaya. So Purnaya was the Diwan of Hyder and Tipu and later the Maharajas also. उसमें कुछ references थे about Tipu, तो उस पे भी बवाल मच गया. And the people gathered at the newspaper office in MG Road. And they told the editor that we demand his apology, my apology. I said, over my dead body, I'm not giving any apology. Whatever I've written is based on facts, and you argue. And the editor was happy to give them double the space to rebut me in everything that I said. But the people who have come for street protests are not the ones who will indulge in intellectual rebuttals.
मतलब वो लिखना आता है तो फिर street protest क्यों करते हैं?
तो उनको कुछ तो करना था, face saving, so they put something together and made an effigy, apparently my effigy, and burnt it in MG Road. And
that's quite an achievement.
The editor of the newspaper sent me the photograph, and those days the only social media we had was Orkut. So almost for a month or two, that was my DP. I said, "Chalo, theek hai." It was a very badly made effigy, to be honest. So nazar utar gaya कि इतने सारे लोगों ने जलाया उसको. But then we had a huge upheaval at home. My mother used to keep very poor health, and she made me promise that you're never going to write and talk about Tipu Sultan in public. And माँ कहती हैं तो what else can you do? So you have to listen. And then I kept the promise till the time she was alive. We lost her in 2018. And उसके बाद मैंने सोचा कि जिसको मैंने वचन दिया वो खुद नहीं है, तो the वचन is also invalid. So I broke the promise, and that's how I think दिल की भड़ास थी इतना निकालना था. 15 साल का suppressed emotions, and it just flowed through these 900 plus pages. But in the recent past, Mukesh, especially in the last 10 years, you've seen Tipu making a re-entry into contemporary political discourse very, very strongly. You've had the Tipu Jayanti being celebrated here in Karnataka by the Congress government. Congress जो करता है उसके लिए BJP will oppose, whatever BJP does, Congress will oppose. That ping pong ball apart, there were lots of social protests too, by the Christians in Mangalore, by the Kodavas in Coorg. And all these people, it's a wound that still remains after 200 plus years of the kind of tortures and atrocities that their ancestors faced. Now, in the middle of all of this, social media noise, आज भी news channels खोलो तो I sometimes feel our Aurangzeb and Tipu and all these people contesting elections, क्योंकि सारे debates उसी के बारे में होते हैं. तो history has come so much in your face in today's public discourse. And in such a scenario, I think it's a responsibility of a historian to put the things in perspective. A historian's job is not to, I always reiterate, not to make a judgment on the characters of the past by the yardsticks of today. Our job is just to illuminate the archives and bring it to the public, who may not either be interested or be trained in the craft, art and craft of sifting through sources, going through tons and tons of material, and then the distillate is coming in a book form. So I thought Tipu was a very important person to understand that way, especially when he is being appropriated and weaponized by petty groups, more so now than the time when people actually gathered and burnt my effigy. I think it's only gotten worse with the decades, and today we are in such polarized times. It's a binary, either you're with me or against me. So in such cases, I think historian's life is full of threats, because everything today is considered sacrosanct. Someone will take offense about something you say, and you can't be forthright.
Got it. So you're saying that some of these historical characters like Tipu, who was probably not many people were even talking about till 90, until that serial that you were referring to. But you're saying that today different groups with different motivation, etc., are able to take the historical characters, attribute certain persona and certain virtue and whatnot.
Correct.
And as a historian, you just felt that this is not very distant history, only about 250 years, and so you were and looks like there are a lot of records and archives and many different accounts available from which you can weave a narrative. And you're saying basically here's the 1,000-page one version of truth. If you really want to understand who the man was, go through this. And I think two questions to that. One is, having gone through this, and I'm sure people will probably disagree, and maybe there are other more valorous account of Tipu Sultan somewhere else. But I just could not figure out what is the big deal. Basically, I think the highlight of his career was those four, or not him, between him and his father, those 4 Anglo-Mysore wars. First two, they were able to hold their own, but there's mostly Hyder Ali's, doing. Tipu Sultan, he, was embarrassed in the third one, had to, his son were taken away from him as a hostage, and fourth, he lost his life.
Yeah.
So what is he celebrated for?
Exactly. If anything, it was Hyder who was a much more statecraft, strategy, military acumen. Every war that Tipu fought against the British, he lost. And as you rightly said, he was killed in the last war almost anonymously. Nobody even knew where his dead body was. So if at all someone had to valorize a king of that time, Hyder would be perhaps, though cruelty-wise, both were more or less the same. And that era itself was like that, where kingship is so closely linked with violence, and to maintain your royal authority, kings had to be violent. But in Tipu's case, that violence was further accentuated with religious bigotry, where that whole consciousness and awareness of my identity versus them, and how the other had to be subjugated. I think that was very, very prominent there. So one really doesn't know what is it in him that through myth making, through all these, PR exercise that is done, he's been resurrected all the time. He just ruled for 17 years, 1782 to 1799. And in that, probably the first 4 years was a high, where he had scripted glorious victories. He concluded the Second Anglo-Mysore War with the Treaty of Mangalore, which perhaps was the last document where Indians had a upper hand over the British. After that, it was a steady downfall. And then some very good victories against the Marathas. There was a Treaty of Gajendragarh and so on, which he signed. Then, of course, the uprisings in Coorg and Malabar, which he crushed. But after that, he goes to Travancore. And from there, his downfall begins. He literally falls off the palanquin. He hurts his leg. And till the end of his life, he has a permanent limp after that. And then the Third Anglo-Mysore War. So there's been a steady downfall of a person. So that's why even in the book, as you would have noticed, 1/3 of the book is dedicated to Hyder, and the rest to the son. I think the father stands as a foil to the son, where everything that you should do to build an empire and everything that you shouldn't do to squander it away. I think these are case studies for leadership.
I think those were times I don't think anyone could have held on to any empire. I think it was really very tumultuous time, and it was just falling apart, for a variety of reasons, I guess, and after the few hundred years of, Mughal rule and so on. The whole country was in disarray, which probably, made the space for British to gain foothold. We'll talk about, what happened during those 40 years. But just again, from history point of view, see, if you look at, I think India's even last 500 years, very rich history. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, and this probably, no one Indian history, there are lots of first of us going north. And, that's, even I'm not sure we have a great history available for that. A lot was happening in south, a lot was happening in northeast and so on. And that history is only just now starting to be more studied from a scholarly lens. Do you think we have enough resources available in archives and letters and original record and so on, beyond folk history and oral history, to really over a period of time, really reconstruct what happened in the last 500 years? Because there are a lot of people, I think India is doing well on many counts. People are interested in knowing about who we are, where we come from. And our history is a very important component of that. So as you're doing research for this, do you feel optimistic that we have enough resources available for historians like yourself to help, listeners, or interested people like me, really learn from our history.
Certainly. I mean, especially the modern Indian period, as you go further in the past, the sources become scantier and scantier. A lot of it is interpretation. But maybe since the time the Europeans came in, they were in the practice of maintaining a lot more documentation and records. So even for this book, a large part of my research was out of London, the British Library, the East India Company office there, India Office Library, that has every little detail. But even within India, you had places like the Peshwa Daftar records in Pune. Every letter that went in and out of the Peshwa office in Marathi, there are copious amount of documentation. Why down south you had the Saraswati Mahal library in Tanjavur, which again documents quite a lot of the the times of the Maratha rule in Tanjavur. You have the Rajput archives in Bikaner, in Jaisalmer, in Jaipur, the royal family. They're all there. Lot of it not yet digitized, not yet accessible. They are probably in scripts we don't understand. For instance, the Tanjavur library has the records in Marathi in the Moody script, the older script of writing Marathi, which very few people read today. So that apart, the material is rich and plenty. It's just that it needs to be, first of all, digitized and accessible. Even for scholars to access, it becomes a very difficult task, going through the bureaucratic rigmarole of permissions and this and that.
And what's your sense of this quality of records? कितने पीछे जा सकते हैं? पीछे 300, 400, 500 साल कब तक when I don't know Babur came to India,
उससे भी पहले
वो records available हैं, मतलब original letters वगैरह जो लोग लिखते थे और वो tax revenue के records and so on.
Yes.
That's outstanding. Cool. So I think your book, as you said, you spent 1/3 of the book talking about Hyder Ali, which I don't think is a household name. Everyone knows Tipu Sultan, but no one knows Hyder. And I think you use the word, he in some way usurped the kingdom from Wadiyars, I think probably in their moment of weakness and so on. And so, what was your motivation covering so much about Hyder Ali? Because he is an interesting character in his own right, or what he did has so much bearing on what happened to during Tipu Sultan's reign?
Both of it, because you can't understand Tipu till you understand Hyder, and you can't. Some of the conflicts also passed on from then to Tipu's time. And as I said, the foil between the two, the complete contrast in attitude. Now, Hyder realized, and he had a very tumultuous childhood. He loses his father when he's just 4 years of age. In fact, the astrologers, when he's born, they tell his father that this child will bring misfortune to you, so kill him while he's a baby and poison the milk. But the father, Fatima, he refuses, and very perverse manner that prediction comes true. And I think when he's 4 years old, his father is killed in a battle. And the father owed a lot of money to somebody. And that Abbas Quli Khan, he comes and raids the house to plunder the wealth and puts Hyder, who's 4, and his elder brother Shahbaz, who's 8 years of age, in a big nagada, kettle drum, and that's beaten
inside the
nagada, or usko band karke uske upar they're beaten upon, and they actually faint inside. So in that situation, the mother, Majida Begum, she runs away to Srirangapatna and pleads with the Maharaja of Mysore, saying, please take pity on my fatherless sons and help us with this money. And the Maharaja very, magnanimously, he didn't know what he was getting into. So he repays the debts. He also takes these people under his fold and says, when they come of age, they will enter the Mysore army. And he kept up that promise. So 1749 in our very city, Devanahalli, was where Hyder makes his first appearance in the Battle of Devanahalli. And steady rise after that. I mean, it's a meteoritic rise for all the difficulties he faced in childhood. I think the later part of his life was completely in contrast. Or maybe those traumatic episodes also brought in him that hunger for power, for safety, for money and all of this, and a vengeful attitude. In fact, the man who did that to him, the first person he attacks after he takes over the control of Mysore is to attack and kill that person, Abbas Quli Khan. So, but he knew, he engineers such a situation, or destiny plays, ball for him, and he manages to overthrow the very throne of his benefactor, the Maharaja, and he becomes a Sarvadhikari, the supreme dictator of Mysore.
And was like overthrowing that benefactor, was it his ingenuity in orchestrating all of this, or it was in such a disarray that it was just he just had to pretty much just walk in and take.
Yeah, both of it, because as I've mentioned in the book, that era was one of chaos in India, the whole of 18th century, in fact, because with the death of Aurangzeb and the disintegration of the Mughal empire, small satraps, whether it was Awadh or Bengal or Hyderabad, seceding from the Mughal throne, so much of wars of succession. You had something in Arcot, a battle for the throne, then one in Hyderabad. And in all of this, the British and the French also intertwined themselves. So you had the Carnatic Wars in South India, where Chanda Sahab and Muhammad Ali are fighting for the throne of Arcot, then Nazir Jung and Muzaffar Jung for Hyderabad. And here you have Dupleix from the French, you have Robert Clive, all these characters entering this potpourri of, I think, disaster. In that everyone was a loser, but this man knew that how to make hay while the sun shone. So even if the Mysore could lose the war, but he would manage to get sufficient benefit, loot the treasures, or train his army with French soldiers and artificers. So that way, I think he managed to. I think he had one focused vision that I have to.
And let's talk about that, his alliance with the French and also learning from the French warfare, which was pretty modern and pretty similar to, I'm guessing, British way of doing things. In contrast to many other, Indian emperors who had these vast armies and all these, elephants and so on. But they were always, just few hundred British troops. You'll just defeat them because of modern warfare. But this guy, he has, French soldiers or French people training his army and so on. And he's able to, as a result, he's able to be very competitive against British, and including, I think, basically effecting 2 significant defeats on British, which are I think almost the only one during those 50 years that anybody in India managed to do.
Totally. And but even that, I mean, getting the Europeans on their side, even the Travancore ruler, Martanda Varma, when he defeats the Dutch, one of the Dutch commanders is taken in to train the Travancore army. So I think Indian rulers of that time, and he's a contemporary, 1750s and so on. So I think they understood that we need their support to train our army. And as you rightly said, the 2 wars, the first and second Anglo-Mysore war, I think they were brilliant successes for Mysore and Hyder. And Mysore, which till that time was an emasculated kind of kingdom. Anybody invades, a Maharaja is just paying them off, even pawning his own personal jewelry, the temple jewelry to pay the people. The Marathas are coming to collect their Chaut, excesses. And the Nizam is attacking. So never a defense is put. In such a scenario, to actually make the Mysorean army fighting fit, I think that credit goes to Hyder. And in the first Anglo-Mysore war, he literally chases the British to the gates of Madras, which is their, Gad, Fort St. George. And the British are forced to sign a very, very humiliating treaty. And then he makes these caricatures also of the British governor shown in an effeminate way and, rubbing his nose at the ground where his feet are. And the shockwaves go all the way till London. There is talk about this in the British Parliament. The board of directors, the court of directors of the East India Company are livid, saying, who is this man who's inflicted this on us? And the stock price of the East India Company tumbles down. So he actually creates that kind of horror for them. And this is continued even in the second Anglo-Mysore war, where I think with the ingenuity of the rockets, Mysore rockets, which Hyder and later Tipu actually innovated on the existing technology by replacing that paper and wood casing with iron. Iron casing which could pack the propellant inside, and it could higher thrust and also a larger distance, that the rockets could almost go to 1 kilometer range and fire, which none of the contemporaries had, whether it was the Marathas or the British.
Yeah, actually it's very interesting to talk about that, because I was very intrigued reading about that in the book, and then I looked up even more. It seems like there is really no recorded use of iron casings for rockets before that anywhere in the world. In fact, after eventually British, Congreve rockets, right? That's but innovation, I guess, fizzled out, but so for a brief period there was a significant product innovation, technological advantage, that both Hyder and
India, I believe in those days had the best quality of iron which we were producing, not even the ones in England, Sheffield and all that. So I think he understood that this would be a good innovation. And those people who were firing it, so even in our scriptures and so on, these are called Agni Bana, which are those fire rockets, so to say.
वो रामायण में दिखाते हैं ना, चलता है
ऐसे
दोनों तरफ जाता है.
Yeah. So that is what this guy. So the people who were operating that were called Barnadars. So those who are operating the Agni Banas. So I think, and now I think recently a lot of these rockets were also found in the Shimoga district in Karnataka. A lot of research was done by Nidin Olikara, a historian of recent times, and the IISc and so on, to see what is the carbon structure in that. So obviously this Hyder and Tipu understood the need for military might, and the fact that there were Europeans in their army probably gave them an insight into what is the best way to defeat the opponent.
And other thing I think looks like, in comparison, what Hyder did well was he was able to also navigate the geopolitical, ecosystem better in terms of, alliance, friendship with people, and also not disturbing any particular community too much.
Yes.
Had a lot of people of, from Hindu faith, in his court and so on. And he navigated it, quite well, in contrast to Tipu, who basically kept accumulating enemies until it became too much, and then eventually they all ganged up on him and finished him off.
I think through his entire 17 years, none of the local powers ever allied with him. Whereas Hyder in the Second Anglo-Mysore War was able to forge a tripartite alliance. The Marathas, Nana Fadnavis, the Nizam and Mysore jointly come together to throw the British out of India. So which means the contemporaries were still willing to sit and break bread with Hyder. But Tipu, through the 17 years, always there was a tripartite alliance against him in all these cases. Then the small chieftains and Rajas of Kerala, Malabar, they ganged up against him. The Coorg Raja, he ganged up against him because of his own policy. And as you rightly said, Hyder, I think, was constantly conscious that I'm a usurper of the throne of a Hindu Raja who rules over a Hindu majority, a Raja who's actually been my benefactor. When I was in dire straits, he's actually protected me. And so if I do something overt, change the religious structure, the texture of the kingdom, people are going to get up in revolt against me. Bagawat ho jayega. So I think for that reason, he managed to ensure some kind of equanimity. Outside Mysore, you would have all these conversions and cruelty. But within Mysore, people could follow what they want. There are reports of even Dasara being celebrated during his time. There are some episodes too where there is, I think, one Pirzada of a seminary. So there's a Ranganatha Swami, the presiding deity in Srirangpatna. His procession is going past this seminary. And like it happens now, there is stone pelting that happened on the procession. And so first day the Hindus are, taken unawares. The next day they all come armed and they beat back. They hit back and continue the procession. Now this Pirzada is very incensed. He goes to Hyder and complains. And Hyder coolly listens to him and then asks him, so who hit the first stone? So he said, we did it. So he said, then how do you expect them not to retaliate? He said, but we cannot allow idolatry in Muslim kingdom. So he's supposed to have shot back at him saying, who's told you it's a Muslim kingdom? I am but a slave of the Raja. And this is a Hindu kingdom for all you care. And if you don't like to be here, you can go. So that kind of, I think, large-heartedness, not with
and
any
political astuteness also.
Right, not out of any love for the religion or anything. It was more that he understood, let's not upset the social cart.
And at both Hyder and Tipu in their own way come across this very masculine people continuously waging war and all of that. I think Tiger of Mysore, I think the title for Tipu and all that. And simultaneously there is I think Hyder's wife, the mother, who is so domineering. The both father and son were like scared of her, right? I mean, how did that happen? In those times, especially, and it comes so again and again.
Yeah, she's quite a towering character. Right. This lady called Fatima, Faqroor Nisa. In fact, Hyder is supposed to, every time he goes to her chambers, he was very scared, and she had a very sharp tongue. And so she would hurl the worst of invectives on him. And once when he's gone there, he comes running out.
To stay grounded, I guess.
He then has all his male friends with whom he sits and has alcohol. Very un-Islamic, by the way. So they're always drunken. And in those drunken revelry, he would say that I can face the British sword, but not my wife's tongue. So I think, she truly kept him grounded. She would decide whom Tipu would marry. Hyder had a choice. She overruled that and she got him married to someone else. Tipu later married both. That's another tale. But then I think she had a great influence all through. And even later, after Hyder's death, so she was constantly in the parda witnessing court proceedings and giving her son advice. In fact, in one such occasion when Tipu goes and in the middle of the court, he just casually tells Purnaya that you're so intelligent, why don't you convert and become one of us? And Purnaya is a very astute, Madhva Brahmin, and so he says, Haji, Huzur, and then quickly he goes away. And then this mother is supposed to have come out of the parda and scolded her son that your father never did such things. If you do this, you're going to lose the support and the trust of everybody. So before, it'll herald your downfall. So before it's too late, mend your ways. But obviously,
because she was wise as well, and she knew also how to navigate the court dynamics, etc. And also, but I think the largest story here is there were, and I think some of your other work also covers this well. There are very powerful women. They may be behind the parda or whatnot, but they're around watching things and having their own opinion and influencing things. In this case, probably influencing in a very dominating manner. But they've been part of the history throughout.
Very true. And of course, in my other book called Brave Hearts of Bharat, where I cover 15 unsung heroes, but there are 7 of them are women, heroines. History should not become his story. It should also be her story, which sadly we don't cover so much. In the case of Mysore, of course, other than Hyder's wife, you had the Maharani of Mysore too, Maharani Lakshmi Ammanni, who Hyder had segregated and put her away in her apartment, but Tipu puts her under house arrest. But she never gives up. Constantly there are emissaries which she sends both to the Peshwa and to the British in Madras, seeking help to regain her kingdom. And she eventually succeeds because it's thanks to her missions that she sent that after Tipu's fall, the British reinstate the Wadiyar with her grandson being put on the throne. And there are even the local, there's one episode of this, even now quite a famous local heroine in Karnataka, Onake Obawa, who in Chitradurga fort was supposed to be the most invincible. And Hyder spent several months, almost more than a year, trying to break through. And Madakari Nayaka, who was the ruler there. And then finally, since you couldn't find a direct entry, he bribes people and this and that and finds a secret passage. That's the only way to enter. And while some of his soldiers, and such a narrow passage, even now in Chitradurga fort, you can see that
that passage is there.
Passage is there. And the place where this lady, she was the wife of the watchman, and she sees these people coming, and so she takes her जो masala कूटने के लिए जो होता है the pestle, which is called onake in Kannada, she takes that and hits on these soldiers and kills several of them
one by one as they're coming in, not suspecting anything, and she's just waiting for them. And that place where these people came and she killed, it's still commemorated as Obawa Kindi, the hole through which they came in. So there was, I think, a lot of such heroic women, not necessarily only from the royal, houses, but even from the a watchman's wife who had that sense of love for her principality. And as I was going through this stories, it occurred to me. I don't know if you've watched this movie PS1.
Yes.
So that whole I don't know whether that movie also set around in those time, but this whole continuous court intrigue and spies and betrayals and everyone talking to like shifting alliances seems like that was the kind of political atmosphere.
Maybe it is the same now too.
Probably, who knows.
Now parties and governments do all of this.
I guess you can say that. So this so Hyder in some ways basically from nowhere he rises, he takes control of Mysore Empire and grows. I think it grows meaningfully in his time. He also builds reasonably good foundation. Was he always preparing Tipu to take over from him? Like, was that a part of the plan, or
no?
It's not clear.
Actually, no. I didn't know about that, but as I researched more, I was quite startled to figure out that how the serial showed the father and son being so much in love with each other, right? I mean, that's how Shahbaz Khan, who played the role of Hyder in that serial. But in reality, the father did not think too high of the son. And right from childhood, he constantly kept punishing him. I think he was a very strict father. So Tipu had a lot of daddy wounds. So, so right from then, where, there is an episode where he was illiterate either all his life because of the kind of childhood he had. The only achievement, literary achievement he had was to learn to sign the first alphabet of his name. But he wanted his sons, Tipu and the younger fellow, Kareem, to get some good education. But he wouldn't know who's a good teacher. So he put him under some Maulana or someone. And after 2 years, he just takes a mock exam. And he's aghast to see what the son has learned.
So parent-teacher meet would not
Parent-teacher meet didn't happen in good manner. He scolds the teacher saying, what bigotry have you sown in my son's brain? And if he learns all this, he will grow up to become a good Maulvi, but not a ruler who can keep this kingdom intact. And so he dismisses him and puts this guy under some, military training. And we see this coming repeatedly, even, in his childhood. So Hyder, understanding that this is a Hindu kingdom, he had banned cow slaughter, bull slaughter and all of that. And Tipu as a young boy would go hunting and kill those very animals which the father had banned the slaughter of. And for that, this guy gets a 6-day solitary confinement punishment where no one is allowed to talk to him. He's literally put in prison and food also is passed from under the door so that, he learns to mend his ways. And we see Hyder talking about this to several of his confidants, saying what all I have gathered with so much of, hard work and intrigue and cunningness, this fellow will squander it all away because of his foolishness and lack of foresight. And there's also an episode where right in the midst of the battle with the Marathas at Melkote, in this place called Chinkurli, in public view, he takes a cane and beats his son.
I think he was about 20 or something.
21.
Yeah.
Imagine a 21-year-old boy, being hit by your father in front of everybody. So Tipu throws obviously a tantrum. He throws away his turban and dashes his sword and says, to hell with you in this war. I am not going to. And then, of course, the father repents. He thinks he's died in that conflict. He goes and prays at the tomb of one of those Sufi saints and what God has given, he's taken it away and all that. But later he comes. But after that, I think Tipu is also forced to sign an agreement. And this agreement copy the British discover after Tipu's death in his room.
So almost after 20 years or something.
After 20 years, yeah. So it has about 8 articles where Tipu is promising, saying, if I steal money, then I can be flogged. If I, all the possible crimes, from petty crimes to even greater ones like conspiring against the kingdom, or if I do espionage, and all of this, then I can be hanged, I can be executed.
Is the letter still there in British archives?
It is there. It is there in the India Office Library.
Original?
The original.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah, and they've translated it. William Kirkpatrick has translated, but the original papers of Tipu's library are all there, also his dream registers and everything.
Yeah, I'm almost, embarrassed to confess, in high school, no one forced me, but I wrote a letter like this about, things that I will do and not do, and I hope no copy of the letter survives in any archives anywhere.
When someone's writing your biography, it's not made
I really hope not. I think we are much poorer now about keeping records, I think, in some ways.
True.
We don't write letters anymore, which is, other people can keep.
Yeah, so he's written all this and signed. मैं अपने होशो हवास में ये इस पे दस्तखत कर रहा हूँ, and it has his sign and royal seal. And constantly Hyder also keeps naming other people. He never wanted to give Tipu the entire kingdom. I think he wanted to partition it, give only one part to Tipu, one to the younger son Kareem. Then there was another favorite of his called Sheikh Ayaz, who was in Mangalore, that area. And Sheikh Ayaz was actually a converted Nair from that community that converted him to Islam. But he was so fond of him. There was also another commander in the army called Muhammad Ali. So he had adopted him as his son. And so very clearly, Hyder knew that this son of his is not going to keep the kingdom intact. So distribute it among several people. And the first thing Tipu does after he comes to power is to eliminate everybody. Sheikh Ayaz is killed. Muhammad Ali gets flogged and killed. Kareem is mentally unstable, so he lets him be. But any attempt at rebellion is struck down. So we see that, I think, that also makes, when one psychologically analyzes people also, I believe a lot of dictators have had troubled childhoods, and especially fathers who are tough to please. So the more tough to please your father is in life, later on you just ensure you're so vengeful, you don't brook even the smallest of mistakes. The punishments are extreme because you have faced all of that.
But looks like Hyder had a much tougher childhood.
Yeah.
I think, but
he did
the adversity, shaped him in a way where he was an effective ruler, for despite being illiterate and everything.
Correct.
I mean, growing up in a royal household, maybe his father, canes you once in a while, but how bad could it be? It doesn't look like a psychological torture. Tiger Woods' father was, I think, much tougher with them than at least what sounds like in this case. So it was, and I think Hyder Ali died unexpectedly. He was not. It's not like he was old or his end is near. He just
was 60 something,
and then this guy takes over. And were there any signs of what kind of ruler he is going to be, for sign of things to come, like people who are watching him or knew him, or as you go through it, or his evolution over the next 20 years was unexpected?
I think all these episodes where you are being wantonly cruel, you're trying to flaunt the existing rule, and one of the biggest markers of his rule was this hyper religious consciousness about me versus the other. That was there, as I said, right from childhood, when you go and hunt those things which your father has banned, almost like a rebellion. So I think that was there. And so the same people, the inner circle of Hyder was filled with so many Hindus, especially Brahmins. You had Purnaya, you had this Anche Shamaya, who was the magnet, power magnet in the kingdom, and very, very corrupt. He used to give corporal punishments to everyone on false pretexts and all of that. There was a treasurer called Krishna Rao, and these are the people who keep the death of Hyder a secret, because he dies in the middle of the war camp. And if the news had trickled down to the opponent, the whole war could have changed. So these people engineer such a coup. So every day there are large chests of treasures, apparently coming from some other kingdom, and Hyder is accepting those, and those are coming out. So in one such big box, his corpse is also put and sent back to Srirangapatna. And these were the people, the inner circle, who actually saved the kingdom for Tipu. And after he comes, all of them turn traitors. So there's something that happens, which is his, religious nature, maybe his personality, which was a lot more whimsical, no tact, no strategy, no kind of listening to sane counsel. And with time, I think he develops into this megalomaniac who has all sycophants around him. No good counsel can penetrate. And you want to hear your praise. And when you get into that sort of spiral, I think your disaster and end is also near.
So he ascends to the throne, I think, in the middle of the second
Mysore
War. And that war ends well for them. So he kind of starts his career on a high. And I think, and because all other Indian kings were losing against British pretty much everywhere. So he was seen, at least, as somebody who has the ability to take on the British. And so his stock was pretty high for a brief period, at least, right?
So he starts off on a very high note. And the same people who scripted victories for the British, Battle of Plassey and Battle of Buxar, which was around this time, the same people are defeated black and blue by the father-son duo. So I think that arrogance seeps in very early. And so, almost that
we can deal with British on equal terms and all of that, right?
Correct. Not realizing. And you also make enemies of everyone else. There must be something that all the powers of the time manage to look at you as an enemy. And mind you, whatever Hyder built an empire, there's not a single extra territory that Tipu adds to the Mysore kingdom in his 17 years. On the contrary, he loses out more. Just keeping all that together itself becomes so difficult for him, only because of lack of diplomacy intact.
And somewhere along the way, he acquires this whole religious fervor. I think it's a countless story of mass conversion and so on, with a lot of atrocities. Just really brutal treatment. It's like You've gone through a lot of lengths to describe in detail.
Yeah.
But it's painful to even read that, it's not we're talking about 5,000 years or something,
Yeah.
just, those places still around. And I think you mentioned in the book that a lot of those stories are people still remember.
Correct.
It's part of living memory for,
Yeah.
maybe about 10 generation ago, it's not that far ago. And which just sounds very strange. Like, what was the grand plan there? It was just, some zealot guy who lost his mind and he is just trying. I don't know what was the bigger agenda behind all this.
So that's also very difficult to ascertain because people say, oh, he did it for political reasons. And as I said, everyone was cruel at that time. But here, for instance, one of the cases, which is of the Mandyam Iyengars in Mysore, there's a community of Brahmins who were there. Now, two members of that community called Tirumal Rao and Narayan Rao, they were acting as messengers of the Maharani of Mysore, whom I mentioned, to carry her messages all the way to Madras. And this Maharani would get only like an hour or something every day from house arrest to go to a temple nearby. So she would hide all those letters in the puja ki thali. Then very surreptitiously this is given to the pujari, and then he takes off the letter and passes it to these two gentlemen, and they carry it to Madras or to Pune as the case. Now these people got to know Hyder and Tipu that all this is going on. Both father and son try their best to capture these men, but they are unsuccessful. These guys give a slip. Now because you couldn't capture those two men, the brunt of it, the price is to be paid by the entire community to which they belong. So 700 men, women and children who belong to that Mandyam Iyengar community, they are called for a feast on the eve of Deepavali, Narak Chaturdashi, in a temple in Srirangpatna called the Lakshmi Narasimha temple. And while they're in the middle of eating, temple gates are closed, and through one gate, intoxicated elephants are sent in to trample all of them to death. And 700 of them. And that community, even to this day, when all of us celebrate Diwali, they don't observe it as a day of festivity. It is observed as mourning for their ancestors. So you can't capture those two people. You punish the entire community. And on a day which is a festival day, which is important for you culturally and religiously. Similarly, you have the Christians in Mangalore, Canada. So during the Second Anglo-Mysore War, there was an apprehension that some of the bishops who were there, of the Christians there, they had started siding with the British because same religion and all of that. So they Tipu wanted to take a revenge on that. And rightly so, a king is entitled to do that. But the bishops get to know and they escape from Mangalore to Goa in their ships or whatever. Now that price is paid by the countless, local Canada Christians who were probably farmers and laborers and common men who had nothing to do with these 700 people also. I mean, children had nothing to do with what the Maharani was sending emissaries. Similarly, these local farmers and laborers, they were all bundled up, almost like what happened in the Second World War. The lists that were made of all the Jews. So houses were marked of these Christians and you take everybody. And again, on a day which is sacred for them, which is called Ash Wednesday, which is before Easter, close to 60,000 to 80,000 of them, literally some of them tied to the legs of elephants and being dragged all the way from Mangalore to Srirangpatna, 300 kilometers, pregnant women being made to march. Many of these women deliver babies on the way. Some of the babies or the mother dies. There's no arrangement for funeral. Many of these corpses are eaten by jackals and dogs. And these are all documented by contemporary, chroniclers. There's a Kannada manuscript called the Barpur manuscript, which talks about this. The Archdiocese in Mangalore has records of what all happened to them. And that's why, most of the Mangalore Christians too were so livid when this Tipu Jayanti was commemorated, because this is, you do something to my ancestors like this, and the tax paying.
And these doesn't look like these are isolated one or two incidents. There are many mass conversions, including I guess you mentioned in the book, the records are probably debated, but in this incident where almost 80,000 people were forced to convert, etc. in a, again, a pretty brutal manner.
Correct. And
he also brags about his part of, his achievement.
Yeah,
a lot of,
that I converted so many. And these are all worn as medallions of honor. And Coorg also, Kodagu, to this day, again, the Kodavas, they commemorate this 12th of December as Martyrs' Day. Because there again, Tipu invites the people, several Kodava chieftains, saying, let's have a peace treaty. So you come unarmed. And so they all believe him and they come. And once they come unarmed, they're all slaughtered.
Yeah.
And so that day is still, commemorated by the Kodavas. You have Tipu's letters, which are horrific. I mean, to this man called Zainul Abidin Shustri, his commander, he writes that people in Kodagu, in Coorg, convert not only the living prisoners but also the dead prisoners. Dead bodies being circumcised and converted. I mean, the profanity and the perversity. And you can't say, oh, you're interpreting. This is his own letter, written in his own hand to a person in his army. So it shows the mindset, which was wantonly cruel. And this can't just be dispensed of saying this is exaggeration, this is, interpretation. There is no scope for that. And it's also perverse, Mukesh, where you have to show crimes as a virtue, where you're bragging about your crimes to show that you're a good ruler. Which is quite a problem in itself.
And there's one thing about he did what he did, and there were different times and so on, and maybe different degrees of cruelty, etc. But if you want to make a hero out of someone, you cannot ignore what the person did, and I guess exaggeration aside, whatever degree, like even one incident of this wanton cruelty is something not to be overlooked, especially if you want to teach to your kids as a
correct, as a role model,
right?
I don't subscribe to this very stupid stand that even the BJP in Karnataka took, where we should remove the chapters on Tipu Sultan. You can't wish away your past just because you like or don't like somebody. This is a reality of the past. So but then, as you rightly said, glorifying them, and to glorify that you have to whitewash their crimes and say these things never happened. I think that is the problem, where it is a subterfuge. It is being dishonest with history and its documentation.
And I think it looks like things for him, I guess all these things start to add up, and by I think what was it, late 1780s or early 90s, maybe by the time a third Mysore war happens, now British and Marathas and Nizam, they're working together, like we have to get rid of this guy.
Correct.
Which is pretty strange for India also, on one hand we lament, the British taking over the country and so on. But in this case, and like leaving his character aside, he's one guy who was something to British along with his father. And but he managed to alienate, these other guys, and they want nothing more than, to get rid of this guy. Even if it requires, working with the British. And that starts to become his undoing, right?
Correct. True. And the third Mysore war is a epochal moment in his life, where Cornwallis leads this grand army. They come and siege Srirangapatna 2 times. Once it's a botched up attempt, and the next time they are successful. And half his kingdom is lost to the British. And he has to give war indemnities of about 3.5 crores, which was much more than the state budget those days, which was 2 crores. And so to raise money for that, he gives away his sons, Abdul Khalik and Moizuddin, as hostages. And then starts, heavy taxation, taking away all the grants to temples and so on, to raise funds to pay these people off and get his sons back. And around, that is just after the Travancore episode I mentioned. So by then he has made enemies of all the chieftains in Kerala, who are also supporting the British, because obviously enemy is friend. And none of them realize that this enemy's enemy is a different kind of species. It's not the same, yet another player in the political chessboard. I think that foresight nobody had.
Right. So the British worked with these guys to finish him off, and then afterwards, those guys also pretty much becomes
used one against the other to finish all of them off.
All of them off, right?
Even to those who keep saying, but Tipu was a freedom fighter who understood the British colonial ambitions. But all along, he was taking the help of the French. And the French had no less colonial ambitions. So if by some chance he had won the war, I think whole of India, or at least Mysore, would have become a French colony. And we'll be speaking half in French today. So that is the sad part, which we don't realize.
So Vikram, after this third Mysore war, he is really humbled, on his knees, had to give away, as you say, half of his kingdom. He had this huge financial burden. He's barely able to meet. And through this, in some ways, writing was on the wall. but he still has some hopes left. He was trying to correspond with the French, even tried to reach Napoleon. I think Napoleon had other concerns at that time, and writing to Ottomans. And he was somewhere harboring this hope that he will be able to build this grand alliance against the British and throw them off the continent.
Correct.
How serious was those, effort? And
no, I mean, they were pretty serious in terms of his intent. And there we must actually, also give credit where it's due to the man, that he was farsighted to understand that all these local players, the British in Madras or the French in Pondicherry, they would sign some treaty. But when it came to executing that treaty, they would say, we don't have the power. It's with our emperor back home. So he said, why do I deal with these idiots? So I'll directly talk to the main head office. And so that's how he sent these emissaries all the way to Louis XVI, Emperor Louis XVI in France. But he chooses the wrong time. It's just on the eve of the French Revolution, where Louis XVI himself is beheaded and Marie Antoinette, his wife, is also killed. So, and the revolutionaries, the Jacobins and all of these people come in. But then he at least does that. And to the Ottomans and to the Muslim world in the Middle East, there he appeals to their religious sentiment, saying, I am the true Muslim ruler. Dekho, maine itne kafiron ko mara, how these many temples and churches I have destroyed. So I should be given the khitab of Badshah. So
मिला था कुछ ऐसा?
हाँ, मिला उसको. So that is the whole thing कि we should remember that the Khiljis, Lodhis and Tughlaqs, to rule over the Delhi Sultanate, so-called, they used to take permission from the Caliph, Ottoman Caliph. When the Mughals came, they dispensed with this system. But Tipu goes back to that. Like, he knew very well that his father was a usurper. And that usurpation is not hereditary. So legal jurisdiction अगर आप देखें, तो it was not जायज़ नहीं था कि automatically a usurper का बेटा usurper होगा. So you have to earn that. So he was constantly aware that I need to get a validation for this legitimacy. So for that he was sending first emissaries to the Mughal ruler, Shah Alam, saying, give me this grant. But Mughal himself was so powerless at that time. He was under the Marathas. And so he could not do much. So he sends all the way to Constantinople to the Caliph, saying, I am the true Muslim ruler, give me the power to rule. And he sends the permission to become the Badshah of Mysore. और उसके बाद ही मैसूर का नाम बदला जाता है सल्तनत खुदादाद या गॉड गिवन किंगडम. मैसूर का पूरा इस्लामीकरण ही डज, वेयर नेम्स ऑफ cities are changed. Mysore name is changed to Nazarabad. Calicut becomes Firokhabad. Mangalore becomes Jalalabad. So every city's name is changed.
It didn't last very long.
No one remembers it also. And the coins also had Persian. Persian becomes the court language, replacing Kannada and Marathi, which was in use till then. And, nice forts, palaces are destroyed, and in its place a new one constructed to show that, apna imprint jamane ke liye. So I think that whole idea of soliciting help from outside, he got from the Muslim world. And these constant emissaries, as you rightly said, just 2 years before his death also, he sends a letter to this Zaman Shah, who's the Afghan ruler, the Durrani family. And he says, there's a clear-cut plan saying, come and invade India for 2 years. And over these 2 years, the first year, we'll flush out all of northern India from the Kafirs. And the second year, whole of South India. And then we'll meet midway and we'll divide this entire subcontinent among ourselves as an Islamic caliphate. So that is the letter that the British intercept. And he's also simultaneously sending letters to Napoleon, who's fighting his own battle there at the Red Sea and all of that, and saying, you invade India.
Any record of Napoleon responding back?
There's a letter of him responding, but which never reaches Tipu because it's intercepted. It's, I think, few weeks before his death.
I see.
And then he sends one entire delegation even to Mauritius. Mauritius was the French Isles. And so from there, so that's also a tragic story, which is there's an imposter who comes from there called Ripaud. He's a total fraud. He comes there and he says, I'm coming on behalf of the French in Mauritius. And we have about 10,000 soldiers waiting to help you against the British. And so listening to him, all of Tipu's commanders and officers, they tell him he's a fraud, don't listen to him, but this guy believes him. And they form a Jacobin club in Srirangapatna. The Jacobins were the revolutionaries in France. And so there are episodes of how he becomes citizen Tipu, and then he wears a French hat, and then they all sing the French national anthem around a tree of equality, fraternity, liberty, all those French revolution terms. And then he sends emissaries with Ripord with lot of gifts and all that. And Ripord, true to the fraud that he was, he takes off all this and runs away. And then the Malak Tik, who's the French commander there, he receives them. And he says 10,000 were promised, only 99 turn up. So against the promise of 10,000, some 99 people. And the news of this French Mysore alliance is broadcasted everywhere. And that is what the British get to know when Wellesley becomes the Governor General. And he says this guy is conspiring with the French, with Zaman Shah, with Napoleon. So we need to get rid of him. And that's how the last Anglo-Mysore war.
So British again, I think they create one more, I guess they again get help from Marathas and Nizam, and they all basically this time they pretty much come and finish him off. And
the Marathas stay away.
They stay away this time.
Yeah, this time they don't participate, but Nizam comes in. Yeah.
But this one, without much fanfare, while it seems like, Tipu was preparing for it, there were all this, rockets being built over the last 7-8 years and so on.
Yeah.
But it seemed like, just one side, British was like fully prepared this time.
Fully prepared. They learned from their mistakes of the third Mysore war. And so it was a all-out siege of Srirangapatna, which couldn't last beyond a few weeks.
And what about some of all these stories on? They still keep surfacing up about, his legendary sword, I think, which Vijay Mallya bought, if I'm not mistaken, in 2004 in some auction. And this other ring that he was supposed to be either wearing, and with this, Ram inscription in Devanagari or some script on that. Are these just, just made up stories? And the sword is real. At least, hopefully, because it was auctioned, for a large sum of money.
Correct. And the superstition is it brought ill luck to whoever had it. In fact, Mallya's family returned the sword after all the misfortune that befell him, because nobody wanted to keep that sword with him.
Where is that sword now?
I don't know. It must have been returned to wherever he bought it from.
Or maybe no one wants it. It's like,
nobody wants to know where it is. And whoever did anything to glorify, whether it was Sanjay Khan or Mallya, they faced consequences. So maybe, since I've not glorified him, but shown the true picture, till now I've been touch wood safe.
I think the moral of the story, don't buy the sword, or even someone gives you for free.
That ring also. I mean, people spread all these stories and myths, saying he always wore this ring which had Ram written on it, and even on the day of his death, he was found wearing that, which is utter bull. It's not true. In fact, maybe someone gifted it to him. It's told that it was a Sringeri Shankaracharya who sent it as a gift.
But the ring is somewhere?
The ring is there. It was taken away from the treasures, but it was probably in his, treasury. But he was not wearing it because the people who discovered his dead body, Allen and Beatson and all these English commanders, they give a very detailed account of everything, what was he wearing, what was his belt made of, and everything. And they clearly say there was not a single ornament anywhere on his body, which clearly showed that he was not wearing it all the time. So these myth making that comes in, he was so secular, he was wearing a ring of Ram on him. It was a gift someone gave and he kept it in his locker. But that doesn't really mean that he venerated it or used to wear it.
Secular and forced conversions definitely don't
come together.
Don't go together, But it's fascinating, I think it's Vikram, thank you for, so painstakingly, taking the time to write this book. And it looks like this book is in some ways your life's work. It started in your teenage year and you kept nurturing
come back full circle,
right? And you come back in full circle, and you've done like very detailed treatment of what happened in those 14 very fateful years. And I think, as I said in the beginning, it's not only you learn about the life of Hyder and Tipu, but also you get a pretty good ringside view of what was going on in India, which was to play a huge role in how history unfolded, subsequent almost 2 centuries. So thanks so much for all the scholarly work you do about the history, and look forward to talking to you soon about your another fascinating book on Savarkar.
Thank you, Mukesh. Such a pleasure always.
Sure, thank you.
At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.